Cool.
There we go.
We're kosher. Thank you, Matthew.
Perfect.
All right, now it says it's perfect. That means we can start. All right, hello everyone. I need to stand far enough back so you can see the stream, but I have to look at it too because I don't know what's on here. All right, welcome. And I'm not selected, so I can't click. You click into the PowerPoint.
Points.
There we go. Good. Yeah. All right, so this is me. I'm Marcel, AI6MS. I have my slides. Graduated from here, 2012 with my master's. Did 4+1. Highly recommend if you like the campus and have classes you're interested in. I'm currently the club's industry advisor for the Compliance Radio Club. Have been since I graduated, pretty much. It's an unofficial post. I really, I help out and answer technical questions and that sort of stuff. I really enjoy it. I was club president and other officer positions, and kind of rebuilt from being a little bit stagnant when I started as a student. I'm an ARRL technical specialist, which is why I get a really cool badge, and that's why I'm wearing it today. It just means that the section manager, John Kitchens, who lives down in Santa Barbara, I think, has appointed me as someone that gives talks places like this and helps out with technical things, like also including these folks. We all went up to a radio site the other day, and we're helping install a new radio site up near Lake San Antonio, so that's fun. The reason this talk is relevant is because I used to work a side job as a professional tower climber. So I was doing part-time for a number of years into it when I was a student, helping out some ham radio operators that weren't physically able to climb their own towers. I was in play escapes, I did rock climbing, and I had enough knowledge to not get myself hurt, and then did some initial rock climbing. That was not, this is my little card that I just got for my recertification in December. One of two cards actually from one of many companies. So these days I'm purely a volunteer tower climber. So that means that I help out nonprofits and clubs and that keeps it fun. And yeah, those are the three technical, those are the actual certification names of what I have. Now we actually started. Okay, and you can find me all over the internet. So if you have questions, you can read also in the club's Discord and just select the other thing again. So
I'm grabbing some connection.
Yeah. Okay, cool. All right, big teaching techniques. I'm just explaining what it is I do and what the rules in safety and what some of the safety gear is behind that. No responsibility, blah, blah, blah. If this is something you're interested in doing, by all means, talk to me. I'd be happy to put you in touch with some places. If we're doing some work days at tower sites, I'm happy to do demonstrations and do some other ground training for folks just to kind of get your feet dirty with things. But yeah, first, and make sure that you're doing everything. Who was at that event? Davide was at that event. He's on the call. This was a tower removal we did up in Cambria at a gentleman's house. And we pulled that whole tower down. It was a big club event, so we dismantled the whole thing. And then the bottom left was one of my.
Where you just bring it down?
He was getting quite old and knew that he wouldn't be able to work on it anymore and was going to need to sell the house soon. So he was prepping. He was doing estate planning. And it's actually really good that's left that has to deal with it before they can sell the house, for example.
Oh.
Actually a big challenge.
So is it
usually the people buying homes don't want the liability of a tower nor the cost of removing it. So they make it a contingency for the house sale that tower is gone, which sucks because every tower down is one less tower that you can fight to get permits to get up as well. So like if I'd known that house was for sale, I would totally
problem to get a license, like
to put up tower.
Yeah.
Really depends on where. If you're in an unincorporated space, it's relatively straightforward, and usually they have allowances for like 35 or 50-foot towers to just go up. If you're in an HOA area, you're lucky to even be able to put a satellite dish antenna on the roof. I've got another talk on that. And yeah, if you're somewhere in between, like in SLO County, they're relatively amiable to putting up towers. But case in point, the 72-foot tower right out there was my grad student kind of project on the side. But we put up that tower on campus, and that required permits with campus and that sort of stuff.
How much is cost mostly? Roughly, I know.
I'm gonna punch you to my other talk because I have a whole talk on that. It's on my YouTube page.
Okay,
yeah,
of course.
Or we can talk.
I don't want to bring you a different direction.
Yep. Okay, so tower climbing, I pulled this definition from Wikipedia, which is actually quite good. Just a brief definition. So tower climbing is a specific branch of like rope access technicians, which are people that use like mostly their bodies. You're not using of cellular radio tower components. So that's anything from antennas, cables, sometimes working in the vault. That's technically not tower climbing work, but it's all part of the same project, if you will. For anything from cell phones, televisions, radio, broadcast radio, two-way radio, amateur radio, you name it. And that's anything from inspections, repair, installations, removals, like we just talked about as well. Covers the whole gamut. So these pictures are kind of cool from the SPRAT website. We've got the acronym later. I forget the Rope Access Technician Association thing. But like bottom left, that's kind of a typical radio tower climbing. And then this right one is like some folks doing rescue training on what looks like a gondola or a ski thing, right? So that's like rope access technicians will do that sort of work as well. Okay, so why do we climb towers? Heavy machinery's equipment is expensive. So like helicopters, of dollars an hour to rent. So if you need it for a day, you're looking at $20,000 to get a crane out. If it's up at some mountaintop, like a number of us were at the other day, getting the crane there will be another couple $1,000s because if you can even get it there, or you need a helicopter to get the crane there first, and then the crane can do the work. Like no joke, this is what happened. Crane, helicopter lifting up a massive TV antenna, I think, on top of a tower. But even with that helicopter, if you look very closely right around here, there are a couple people hanging out on top of the tower because someone has to put the bolts in and tighten them down when the helicopter lifts them with tower climbers. Another example, this was in King City. We were installing some antennas on a 90-foot, 80-foot tower, and we had a boom lift, which was great, a nice big boom lift. So I got dropped off at the top of the tower, and then he was able to bring up my gear and bring up the antenna we were installing. So I didn't have anyway, so they had already rented it. We're doing other work on the side of the tower. I was able to utilize that to make my install that day a little bit easier. So that's kind of neat. The other ones are like, access is often very limited, right? So some of these sites, like we talked about a mountaintop, it's hard to get to, so you can't necessarily get the machinery there. Or on the physical tower itself, depending on where you're routing cables and doing stuff, you can't get to it unless you're like Bay Area, the big trident that sits on top of the hill on the red and white one. That one has an elevator going up one of the. You can't get on that tower any other way, so it has to be a tower climb. Okay, got a couple of wordy slides, don't worry. So tower climbing is inherently dangerous, and I just say that because you're off the ground, right? 2 feet on the ground, the furthest you can fall is the height of yourself, right? Like heavy reliance on the actual climber themselves for the safety critical processes, right? So the gear that you're using, you're relying your life on that gear, right? You're relying your life on your own training, and your ability to be rescued, or if something happens to you on the tower, you're relying on your coworkers, on your partners that are on the tower when necessary, right? If you just call a regular fire department, they won't have the skill set nor the equipment to be able to actually rescue you off the tower. They need to call in like search and rescue, like in SLO County, USAR gets called, that's the United States Search and Rescue Group from the sheriff. They'll actually come out, and they often have a 6-hour response time or a 4-hour response time, so you've been hanging out on the tower for quite a while. And if you're bleeding or unconscious,
and because they have a ladder.
They have a ladder. If it's tall enough to reach and they can get the truck there, great. Then they can get you down really quick. If you're on a tower that's more than 6 stories tall or whatever the ladder truck and SLO does, you can go up to Pulley Canyon Village heights. So whatever that height is, that's why they bought the new ladder truck. Fun fact. Yeah, and they have to do annual tests and everything, and they do drive around regularly to make sure that they all know how to navigate those routes tightly.
You're wondering why they were up on our roof.
Yep. Right? Just like I have to do ongoing training as well, the fire departments do the same thing, right? And that's part of it is those are the tallest buildings in SLO. So that's their practice is to make sure that they know how to deal with those facilities. Yeah. Yeah, so the big one that I point out too is that there's been this big shift in safety in the last 2 decades. If you read up online and search for like, is tower climbing dangerous? You'll see a bunch of articles that say it's the most dangerous job out there, from like deaths per 100,000 workers or something. In the last 2 decades, in large part to a number of nonprofit organizations and industry safety organizations, it's actually gotten out of the top 10 now, which is kind of a big deal for the industry. And there's been a really big push for a lot more safety. So this is the current like fatalities in 2020 per 100,000 full-time workers. And this is like the top 8, which is like truck drivers, structural iron steel workers, aircraft pilots, flight engineers, roofers, fishing, hunting, and workers, and logging. Logging is way up here at 80 deaths something. Tower climbing is now down at like 10 something. So it's down here, which is really good. So the industry's come a long way, but that's large part to regulation and safety. Which is why I put a big emphasis on that as well, because I'm pretty nerdy about that. So when we talk about regulations, there are 3 big groups that have regulations, and yes, I expect everyone to read these, and there'll be a quiz next week. Kidding. The first one is ANSI. They have a fall protection code Z359, and that is what all the equipment here is certified to. So we can pass one around too. But if you look at these closely, you'll see in the corner here it says ANSI Z359. And that's the certification for equipment. So that's test procedures, manufacturing and quality requirements, traceability requirements. There not frequently, but there are recalls in the industry when like a pulley gets sold where they discover that like some latch wasn't properly installed and can pop up in some weird case, just like cars have recalls, and they'll do industry-wide recalls. Like that just happened for some Rock Exotica pulleys. Happens for carabiners occasionally when they didn't get stamped properly or missed something. That's part of the safety of the industry is that they can do that traceability. If you just go buy some cheap, no-named, non-certified thing off of eBay, you're balancing your life on that thing. So use your judgment. The next one is OSHA, so Occupational Safety and Health Administration for the United States. And they have 2 specific parts which cover fall protection. So that's just the term for anything you do to prevent yourself from falling. So anyone that works on scaffolding, that works on cranes, that works on roofing, that works on multi-story buildings. If gators coming up on multi-story buildings, you need to make sure you have fall protection as well. It's very important. And then general fall protection and rigging, a little bit more specific to some of the telecom stuff than the other sections. And then the last one here is ANSI. So this is a newer one that I'm actually not as familiar with, but this is specific to tower climbers on communication structures. And that's kind of a big deal that the industry actually came out with a standard for that. So that's starting to get used in some training. Don't worry, the dog. He's only
It's a big dog.
Yeah.
Like, hello, everyone.
Last big wordy slide, I swear. So 3 big organizations that are useful, especially if you're interested in this stuff. We can send out a PDF afterwards and post to the website or something, but these websites are really great resources if you want to learn more about this sort of stuff. They've got great training materials, they've got some videos, they've got YouTube channels and all sorts of stuff. So the first one is NATE, used to be the National Association of Tower Erectors. Now it's called the Communications Infrastructure Contractors. I love sharing that because it's great. But they are a very great organization. They're a nonprofit trade organization, and they're a huge reason why tower climbing has become safe for the last decades. They do, for example, like emergency funds and insurance for families that have lost tower climbing members and provide support network and infrastructure. So it's actually a pretty serious, big deal. But they have some really great resources. The other one is the Society of Professional Rope Access Technicians, that's SPRAT. They have some fantastic certifications. So anyone that works on windmills or turbines or that sort of thing, they all usually get a SPRAT certification if they're in the United States, or they go to the Industrial Rope Access Trade Association, this is an international group, and they also have IRATA rope access technician training. So that's a level above what I have. I have tower climbing, which covers kind of a subset, and then with rescue and some rigging stuff, I have some rope stuff. But like these folks do some absolutely nutty stuff. If you follow their Instagram channels or Petzl's Instagram channels, they are just wild. Like 200 people playing with like 20,000 feet of rope on a weekend with like a million police. It's freaking crazy. So, okay, you don't need to read this part. Safety principles, 100% tie off. So this is the big shift in industry. What that means is that anytime your feet are off the ground, you are clipped into the structure, right? And this is in OSHA terminology, it's two forms of contact with the tower. One is your primary one, that's your hands and your feet. That's considered your primary. And then your 100% tie off is your secondary, so your safety. You're not usually hanging on it, but that's how you're actually maintaining your second connection with the tower. So if your primary fails, if your hand slips, if your foot slips, if you fall, your secondary protection catches you. That's the fall protection aspect, right? So, and 100% tie off means these two are never both on my harness when I'm let them off the ground. At least one of them is clipped in the tower at all times. And if I'm moving it, I have to clip one before I clip the other, right? If you ever pull them both off, won't have that bad, okay? Because then your secondary is gone. If you slip, you're falling and having fun with potential energy. Okay. Yeah, that's their long duration. Okay, last safety slide, and then we get into some fun ones. So OSHA requires what's known as a job hazard assessment, or JHA. This is an example from one of the ones from my training class. Anytime I do a tower climb, people that have come with me, they know we always do a little on-the-job huddle, like a safety huddle before we start, where we go through who's our safety person, who's our rescue, where are the nearest fire stations, police, ambulance, whatever we need, who's the site contact, who gave us permission to be there, what are their tower climbing requirements, and then what are the hazards we have for the day? Is it hot? Is it cold? Is it windy? Might it rain? Is there a chance of lightning? Who's watching these things? What's our no-go criteria? How are we making sure everyone stays safe? And that includes ground crew, plus the people on the tower. Always having a point of contact on the ground that's like you're in charge of the ground crew, gives you one point of contact. So it's just this like whole safety mindset around climbing. This is a game changer. When I first started climbing, we'd just go to some dude's house and we'd climb. Now that I'm doing bigger tower climbs at bigger sites, it's really critical to do this sort of thing. And they've come in handy a couple of times. We've not needed the emergency portions of it, but like someone shows up and says, hey, who gave you authorization to be here? Boom, here's our thing. There's their contact information. You can reach out. That's really important, especially when we're operating as amateur radio operators. Oftentimes we have handshake agreements into facilities, or people are giving us free rent or free tower space. It's really critical that we're giving back to that community, being nice, being really on top of our things, doing everything by the book, never assuming or coming in with an attitude or being arrogant. Like that courteousness is absolutely critical. And yeah, like that's so big, so important.
Quick question.
Yeah.
How do you deal with, like, it's not a normal height, it's really high. How do you deal with that? 'Cause I'm not afraid of like height, but dealing with that height it's different.
Yeah, so most of the communications towers in California that I've climbed are all under 200 feet primarily.
Oh, yeah.
So if you compare it to like going rock climbing, if you climb a lead wall, that's a 60-meter route potentially, that's 180 feet. It's about the same. So if you're comfortable rock climbing and on a wall and rock, I mean, granted, you're generally looking into the wall most of the time, you're not looking down. That's fine, but on a tower, it's generally the same thing. You're looking into the tower most of the time you're climbing. The times where vertigo can hit, where you get a little bit queasy, is when you look out or look down. If you look straight down and like people are milling and you've got a rope that's swinging back and forth and the tower's shaking a little bit because of the wind or another climber that moved and then the whole tower torqued a little bit, that's when it gets a little bit fun, right? And that's sometimes where I've been on a tower where myself or someone else gets, hey, got a little bit of vertigo, cool, just stabilize, you're still fully clipped in, clip in your positioning, just chill for a little bit, like look at the rise again, stabilize, you're good, okay, hey, don't do that sort of motion on the tower again. That was really unsettling. Done, move on, right? I have also had someone that I've climbed with where they froze up on the tower and then took us 45 minutes to literally climb down next to them on the tower, moving their hand one at a time and not having them ever look down, because anytime they look down, they have to wait for 5 minutes before they can start moving again. And that's a problem, because now I'm having to rescue them effectively, even though they were still kind of mobile. But that brings its own hazard, and now we're not getting the job done, and we need to make sure that person gets down safely. So that's happened.
Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Generally speaking, though, as on one of my earlier slides, PS, it's fun and pretty, right? I love climbing at tower sites because it combines all my hobbies. I used to be Polyscape's outdoor trip leader. I go rock climbing. I played with all this gear. I love radios, playing with radios. I love volunteerism, community service. So, like, and accessing outdoors and going to mountaintops, all of these things are combined into this tower climbing hobby. Because on a weekend, I get to pick the days because I'm a volunteer. I get to pick perfect weather days and say no thanks if it's raining or if it's freezing or whatever. And then we get to drive up to these sites that a lot of people don't have any access to the public, so you feel kind of special. And then you get to climb these things, do good, have fun with your gear, and it's just a win-win for them. So I really enjoy it. And
so like, you're not work as all volunteer.
It's just volunteer. Yep. Yeah. And I could work as a professional, but then I don't get to choose the days I climb because if a job needs done, a job needs done. And then you have all these pressures coming in for, we need to get this done. Hey, we're only getting paid for 3 hours. It's taking you 5. Well, that's on your own dime. You got to get this done. You got to go fast. And you start cutting corners. You can see what that kind of stuff
could be more dangerous.
So by being a volunteer, I get to set my own rules and I get to set my own safety protocols to go on. Downside is I'm usually the highest trained person on site. So if something happens to me, I need to make sure I always have a second there. So Davide, who's actually on the call, he's done rescue training with me as well. He's capable of rescuing me and I'm capable of rescuing him. We've practiced that as well. We'll get into that a little later. But that's a really key thing to be safe at these sites. Because otherwise, if I'm just climbing by myself and everyone on the ground doesn't know how to save me, then what's going to happen? Right. So talking through the JHA beforehand to make sure we know what the plan is. Right. Michael, when we go to radio sites, is often the rescue response on the ground. If I'm on the tower, he's the one in charge. And then deal with that because he has some training as well. So yeah, cool. All right, gear stuff now. Okay, so at a very basic level, you've got a couple pieces of gear. Full body harness. So this is my harness. This is the Petzl Avobot of Fast. This is a slightly nicer harness. And the key thing about a full body harness that looks different than a rock climbing. How many people here rock climb? Just get an idea. Oh, okay. Or have rock climbed? Okay. So pretty similar. Petzl is the same company that does rock climbing, recreational rock climbing gear. They also make a ton of industrial gear. So this is a full body harness. The key thing is it has shoulder straps and it connects both front and back so that if you get inverted in this, you can't slip out. In a rock climbing harness, it's just a belt and leg loops, right? So if you cut off this top half here, that's the rock climbing harness. If you flip when you're falling off a tower and you get hooked on something or your legs get caught and then you fall down, you can literally slip out of the harness and still have fun with potential energy, right? So full body harness is critical. That's absolutely required. The fit is really critical too. And we've got one that people can try on too in the bag later if you'd like. That's my loader harness. So full body harness, that's really key. Other key features, a lot of attachment points. So just like the fins on a shark, you've got your dorsal attachment point, your sternal attachment point, then I forget what they call that one. And then you got the 2 side hooks, which are kind of your hip attachments. So those are usually for workplace positioning to be able to clip in and kind of lean back into your big belt. Some of the harnesses, I think we brought it, that one has a seat on it as well. So that's a little fancier if you're doing a lot of suspended work and you literally have a seat that your butt can rest on instead of just sitting in the straps all day long. So depending on the type of work you're doing, you might want a different type of harness as well. So harness number 1. Number 2, helmet. So this is my helmet. This is a cask climbing helmet. It's mesh, but the mesh on the top is such that stuff can't fall in. And it's foam lined. So like a regular hard hat is for impact on you. So for falling things, if you think of a hard hat at a tower site or at a like construction site, they usually look very tall, right? That's literally because they're creating an air gap for the top to deflect when something gets dropped on it. If you look at the test object that they drop on it, it looks like a sharp boba cup if you made the bottom sharp, and they drop it onto the top of it, and it needs to deflect, not crack, and then not puncture, and not go too deep, so that it actually hits your head. And those are for things falling on you. A bicycle helmet is for you falling onto something, right? It's all foam, and that's for you falling onto the pavement, and it slows down your head from hitting a stationary object.
Yeah.
Climbing helmet is a little bit of both, right? So you have a little bit of that suspension in there, and then you have this foam in there as well, but then you also have the harder outer shell, right? And that kind of combines the two. A lot of rock climbing helmets have a kind of similar thing because you have both falling rock and wrench and bolts and antenna hazards, and you have the, hey, my head slammed into the side of the tower when I fell. That. If you fall fully to the ground, this isn't going to do much because there's just so much energy there. Though they have occasionally saved people, which is kind of wild. So fall hazards is probably the biggest one. And then it also gives you a little sun protection. You can mount a headlamp on it. You can put a big visor on the front. You can get visors around the back. Then bring it today, but I have this ridiculous sombrero that goes around the side with the big like neck cover. When it's like 95 degrees out, we're climbing in Fresno. It was great. End of the day, I didn't even feel any heat exhaustion because I was just I was in shade all day. I was long sleeves and gloves, and I had that crazy over. You can pass these around too. Just try not to drop things. Okay. Next one is fall arrest lanyard. So this is your primary or your secondary attachment, right? Your hands are your primary. This is your secondary. So these are always attached on your dorsal. So this will get clipped in on that dorsal attachment D-ring on the back of my harness. That's this area here. And you'll notice if you try to actuate these carabiners, they're triple action. So you have to push up, you have to rotate, and you have to pull, right? And that's really key that they're really hard to open. So if you look at a regular rock climbing carabiner, which I also have, they're either non-locking or they're just like a screw gate, like this guy, right? So this is a regular climbing one from Moot and a climbing company. And this can just open, that's a single action. Now, if you screw gate closed, it's locked. And that's one motion, which can just be like rolling up against a rope. And then that same rope that's pushing on that can still open it. So these are not suitable for tower climbing. You will not find any screw gate carabiners that are ANSI 359 certified. So this is triple action. So try playing with that. It's kind of cool. How those open. They also have this retention bit in there. And the key thing about the fall arrest, so two big things to point out here. One is pelican hooks, as they call them, right? And these, again, are dual action. So you need to grab it from both sides to get that to open. If you just push on it from there, it won't. If you just push on it, it won't. You have to push on the back and on the front, and then it'll open up. And these are huge, so that you can go around large grippy things. Really good to clip onto here. But like chair legs, right? So if you're going up a tower and this chair leg goes on there, you can easily clip that, right? And again, you have two of them so that you can always have one attached when you're moving up and down. These are slightly springy, which is nice. So you actually have a little bit of extra reach, and it keeps some of that slack out of the way so you don't trip on it or get it caught on yourself. And these ones are really fancy because you can actually clip them to themselves. So here, we'll do it around the table like so. This one I can actually clip to itself, which means on something where the clip doesn't work, this is a legal attachment. It's a safe attachment point. That's still full strength, which is really cool. So on a lot of towers where they're like really weird leg sizes or shapes that you can't clip otherwise, this particular one costs a little bit more than the one here, allows it to, they call it tie back, so it can clip itself. And then the last neat thing about this, so the most important part is what's known as the absorbica, that's bezel. So when you fall on this, if it was just a solid rope with no stretch in it, right? You're gonna, as soon as you hit the tension of this rope, you get stopped immediately, right? That's an ideal for them, right? Whatever. You're literally like ripping your back apart when you land. So the some people call them colloquially screamers. You have people screaming when they fall. And sometimes these make a little screaming noise. I won't have you guys open it, but I can the same nylon mesh that's here. And when it actually activates, it's ripping stitches out of it. So it's still a full strength length, but it's folded onto itself and it has stitching the whole way. And that stitching actually has more towards the end to make sure that you don't like hit that end Yeah, and it pops open then. So yeah, there's so much force involved that like the cover disappears, that thing goes like that quickly. There are lots of great videos. I didn't bring any videos in this. We could play some later on YouTube. It just yanks and it makes a big loud noise, and then you kind of go like to stop. It kind of feels like you landed in quicksand almost. Yeah. Like it's like right, and you quickly slow down because it's distributing that force over a longer distance is what it's doing to minimize the peak force. Because that's really the intent. The peak force, especially if you clip that onto your belt here, like down below, it would yank you like this, and that would literally shear your back, right? Which is why they attach it up here, because then when you fall, it's in line with your spine. So that's your body can take the most force that way. That's why jump seats are like you're sitting like that. Think of ejection seats too in jet planes. Same thing, they're hitting tons of G forces when they get shot out. That's keeping it in line with your spine. That minimizes the risk of bone fracture and that sort of stuff. Serious stuff.
Yes. The reason you use that is you're falling, like as opposed to like just a dynamic climbing rope. Are you falling a lot further? Is there a lot more slack out usually on falls like that?
Yeah, so with a dynamic climbing rope, you typically have anywhere from 20 to 30% stretch in the whole length of the rope. And and it's the distance is the challenge here, right? So this thing can extend, and this is a longer one, so I forget the exact math on it, but this is a 12-foot fall, so 12 feet plus 6 feet lanyard plus 2 feet of stretch from me, plus my height is the total extension height of this to my feet from where I fell. So really for the first like 18 feet on the tower or so, it's not actually stopping you before you hit the ground. It might slow you down and you'll kind of like you're not actually getting stopped and it's ending suspended. With a climbing rope, if you're falling at like halfway up a wall, if you're at 20 meters up, you've got 60 feet of rope that's now going to extend by 20, 30%. And that's the distance over which your fall is getting extended. And yeah, in climbing, there's a little bit of an arc. There's a graceful method of falling off a wall too, so that you're minimizing the force in the system. You're again trying to minimize the peak force in the system for both yourself and for your unit, because you don't want to pull a bolt out of the wall and pull a piece out there. So if you exceed the maximum force of that little dam that you put in the wall, you're going to pull right out. And then now you added that next fall distance to the next piece. That next piece now has an exponentially higher force on it as well, right? And then the next one. So you will see videos of people going pop, 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 pop.
I have a question.
Yes.
You fall, what's stopping you from plonking against the tower again?
Your helmet.
You will inevitably do that.
And gracefully falling as well. So if you know you're about to fall, or you know you're in a precarious situation, planning that out is really helpful. Just like rock climbers, when you're in a sketchy spot, you're in the crux of a climb, one of those difficult moves, and you think there's a higher probability of falling, you'll tell your belayer to like take in some rope. On here, I might like pull my positioning in, put an extra clip in. I might tell my other climber, hey, this move's a little bit sketchier, just to all be a little bit more prepared for it. And think about, okay, if I fall right now, how am I actually going to be falling? Where am I going to land? Is there a sharp antenna that's going to impale me from down below? Maybe I want to move around to this side of the tower before I move. Yeah, so you need to be thinking through, contingencies.
Which is like the best place to like brace an impact. Front, back, or arms.
Probably using your arms or your legs to stop yourself. You really want to protect that core spine is really the main thing. Spine in your head and your soft goodies here, right? So anything in your chest region. Yeah.
So is that where that piece of equipment, that's not something that you're like leaning on throughout your climb radius. It's more designed for the back to the fall.
Purely a safety, yeah. As soon as you've loaded that, it needs to get replaced. Okay. So if you ever end up hanging on it, it's technically supposed to get replaced. And it's a one-time use device. And technically your harness, use my harness, you can just see the beginnings of the orange here. If this one's been fallen on, there's actually a couple pieces of stitching in this one as well that'll take a couple extra inches of force. And then it'll say a big stop or halt or something like don't use this harness anymore. So the harness is also a one-time fall. So like you're really not supposed to fall. Yeah, don't fall.
How expensive are these?
I've got a slide on that, don't worry. Okay, positioning lanyard. How are we on time? So
curious, Marcel.
Yeah.
So if you do fall during a climb, you typically go down after, or do you still stay up and typically work?
So if you've fallen and your fall arrest device has deployed, you're coming off the tower. And technically, your climb down, you need to have a different fall arrest device because that one's never used, right? So at that point, like if you're able to self-rescue, get yourself off the tower, that's the ideal. If someone needs to come up and rescue you, then you're getting lower down. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point too, right? So any fall of any magnitude, technically, you want to get checked out medically because again, you're doing weird forces to your body. You don't even know necessarily your adrenaline's going to be shooting through the roof. You won't feel any pain necessarily because you're just completely wired on adrenaline. So, okay. So we made it to the third bullet, progress. All right, next one is positioning lanyard. So I put this one on basic gear because it's really a non-negotiable. You need some sort of method of attaching yourself to the tower so that your primary can relax, okay? Your primary is your hands. You can climb a tower with just a harness, hard hat, and the pelican hooks, and you're technically legal, right? You're technically by the book meeting the fall arrest requirements of OSHA, and you can technically climb like that. Realistically, if you're climbing more than a couple minutes, your hands are gonna get tired, right? Your legs are gonna get tired, you're gonna wanna break. And if you're ever working and you need to use both hands to like mount an antenna, you need a different primary attachment mechanism. So this is a great example of primary attachment mechanism. This is a Petzl Grion hook, and it goes around the thing. I wish I had like a pole right here, right? Here, so I'm gonna hold that. So you're the tower, you're just in the arm, there you go. So that's the tower. And then on my harness, I've got two hooks on either side. This is now my positioning, right? And I can adjust the length of this really easily. I can extend it out if I want to, right? So if it's a big tower, like I can come all the way back to here. If I really want to, I can flip this onto the tower, and then I can come all the way back here and position like that even, right off the center point. So it's giving me a lot of options to do my primary positioning. The whole time, my hooks are still on somewhere. But this is a lifesaver. Davide has one too. He actually got one before me because I had a different positioning system before that. And I borrowed it and I was like, this thing is amazing, I need to get one. So I got one. And then this little piece of black is just abrasion resistance because these ropes you can replace, but the rope is what's load bearing. So you want to protect it, especially on towers. There's a lot of sharp metal. Still this random scar on my forearm that I don't know where on the tower it came from, but I took off my long sleeves when I got off the tower one day. I was like, there's a little scratch there. So it's just funny how that works. So that's workplace positioning. And there are a whole bunch of different variants of that. The one in the picture here, this is like a cheapo one that is like manually like a belt buckle adjustment kind of thing. Just a little bit harder to use. This one is fantastic and using. Positioning lanyard, PPE, personal protective equipment. I highlight this because it's really important. Gloves, glasses, and boots. I'm not wearing my boots. I'm not wearing my gloves. Oh, they're right here. See, very good. Yeah, I knew I put them somewhere. Right? These clips are really handy too. If you ever need to take off your gloves, you're working on like a little connector, or you're doing some tape work. Sometimes you want to take off your gloves. Make sure you don't drop them. I have dropped a glove before in a tower. And then you're going down to one glove or you send up another one. And especially if it's cold. I mean, I got in, I did a cold tower climb where we were in the clouds literally. And I brought a second pair of gloves because I knew they were that critical. If I did lose one, I wouldn't be able to make it down comfortably because my hand would probably like cramp up or just get too cold and not be able to grip anymore. So I actually brought a second pair of gloves. Because we were in the clouds, the whole tower is soaked because it's 100% humidity. And that allowed me to swap out my gloves. They were completely soaked, right? Because they weren't waterproof. Boots is really important, especially like a nice steel shank in them or some sort of strong shank. That helps relax your calves so that when you're putting your feet on the tower, kind of hang out there. Because you usually don't have a nice flat platform to put your feet. You're usually on like a weird edge, right? So if you have to stand on this for hours on end, like if your shoe has like strength in the heel, and if it goes up your ankle, that'll help to just support reduce fatigue as well. That's really a key thing. I've been on a tower for 8 hours on a day before. Most of the time I'm hanging into my not hands, so I've got my primary positioning that's holding me in place, or I'm sitting on a leg of the tower and flipped in with my secondary. Something along those lines just to retain your energy and make sure that you can still self-rescue that whole time. So you don't want to climb to the point where you're so tired you can't self-rescue yourself. And then the last one, ID, identification. So this is mine, the little red one on my wrist. It's a plug for road ID. They make bicycle IDs. Some form of identification. I usually don't climb with my wallet on the tower because that's just extra bread to bring with me. If I get dragged off somewhere, this has contact information for my family, my blood type information, drug allergies, donor status, just a basic little thing that I always wear doing high risk activities. So I think that's, again, a little important safety thing just to have. All right, question on the basics. Guess what the next slide is?
Nice.
More here.
Oh, nice. We don't do with the prices.
And yeah, we're good, right? We need to be out at 8.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh.
Yes.
At 8.
Oh.
40. Oh, we got hours.
Oh.
All right. Okay. So let me grab my box real quick. Excuse me. Yeah. So we got this one. What do we have? Anchor straps. Okay, so anchor straps. If you're attaching this tower and you're putting in one permanent, this is a 5,000-pound rated anchor strap. So the actual strap is the black piece. The yellow is all just abrasion resistance. And this can go through itself. So that's in a choker style. You go around the leg of the tower. Interestingly enough, that's half as strong as, so this is the basket hook, that's twice as strong as one. So this is really, if you need to clip in an extra spot, and extra weight, but they allow you to clip it on the tower and just another attachment point. If I'm using where I have a primary rope and a secondary rope, that's starting to get the rope access space, you need to have rated attachments for those ropes. Carabiners, we had a couple around, here a couple more. What do we have? Ropes, rope access, ropes and defenders. Okay. So the orange bag, people can look at. That's got it for show and tell. So if you're doing down a rope, we'll have 2 ropes that you're dealing with. One is, again, your primary attachment. That's the one I'm physically attached to and hanging, so it'll be clipped up somewhere. And then this is just 7/16 rope, I believe. And these are all, again, climbing rated stuff. So it's a little bit different than rock climbing rope. This is a static rope, or semi-static usually. Maximum strength, 5,738 pounds. And these have traceability all the way back to the manufacturer. This has its own eyelet in it, makes it really nice to work in. Don't have to put in a figure 8 on the end. That's not a carabiner that you can use if you're hanging off yourself. That's what I use for the bag. You need to use one of the triple locking one for that. So this would then be what I would rig up, and you can actually rappel down it, which is kind of fun. Right. The nice thing about this, so for rock climbers, this looks kind of like a gree-gree. The thing is I don't actually need to unclip it to be able to rig it and then clip it shut. You don't want to drop this while you're on the tower. As soon as it's dropped, it's trashed as well. I actually rigged that one backwards. See, there you go. So a good example, if I started climbing on this, that would immediately lock up. So that's a safety that if you rig it backwards, you can't go anywhere. Right? So if you actually rig it correctly, unlike what I just demonstrated, then it's going up to my anchor, and I'm not going to do this by myself. That's the anchor, and then this is actually how you descend down with this guy. Kind of cool, and it lowers down. And then if I pull too hard, that locked, it's locked up again. That's a panic function.
Is this like the commandos that's going down the building?
Commandos going down buildings. That's exactly what I feel like.
it's like that.
Yeah, it's the same concept. So it's called descending, right? Or upsailing or upseilen. It's the German term. Actually, an English word now too. It's kind of funny. Literally means off rope, up or down rope. Seil is rope in German. And that's what people do when rappelling is often a term you'll hear. the equipment, 3 times as heavy as the recreational stuff, with those extra safety features built in, the anti-drop features, the mechanic walkout, where if you pull it too far, it auto stops. It doesn't just release it fully, right? Because if you release it fully, you're going to be falling faster, and then you just panic more, and then you just pull more, right? So it's a little bit annoying for someone that's really comfortable doing this, because I was trained as a canyoneering wrestler, go like, oh, and now I can go faster, right? But there's a limit there. It's actually kind of good, right?
What's the name of this, Susan?
This one's a Petzl ID. And that's the ID evac. It's the same piece of hardware. You can probably figure the difference. Different engagement points. So this one engages here. This one engages all the way here. One's designed for use this way. The other one's designed for use if you're lowering someone from up. But they can both be used interchangeably. It just makes it a little bit easier to work with. Got them on an awesome sale, which is why I got to. Very handy. Ascenders. I don't know where mine are. Going up ropes, same idea, same as the rockline ones actually. Those are allowed to be used. And then arrester. So this one's cool. So when you're using ropes and you're just doing rope work, you still need that primary and secondary. So my primary, one of these devices, typically clipped either to my waist or to my chest. Except I can smack you in the face, so you need to make sure the distances here are all valid. Sometimes I'll put it on a little extension to get it not whacking you in the face. Your secondary is this very cool device. This is called an ASAP. This one's taking an ASAP lock, so it can only go one direction. In that way. This again, notice a couple familiar things. It's designed to reduce the forces in a fall. And this little guy is super cool because it's a wheel. It's an infinitely spinning wheel that sits on here and will just roll along. And if you pull quickly on it, it locks. That's locked. And then it'll release, and then if you go up a little bit, put the mic there we go, release. And now it'll start moving again. It'll move both down and up. So it'll go both ways on the tower and rotate with it. And if you ever fall, it locks. And then if you fell a distance, this would strain it. So this is what's then absorbing the shock. And that's again attached to your dorsal. So this is my secondary attachment point, 100% tie off. Let's go into that other room. Yeah.
How much more it takes for one of those?
Something like 300 pounds or 500 pounds. I forget the exact number. It's in the data sheets. And around that, and then yeah, once it's activated, it makes all sorts of like streamers come out of it and everything. So you're like, don't use it again. Interestingly, you can use the end pieces again. You just replace this middle one, which is actually kind of nice. On this, at least, this one's stitched in, so you have to replace it a lot more. Okay, so that's the rubber. That one's kind of fun to play with. Just real quick on that again. So everything here, you'll notice there's always multiple ways to open it. So I can't open this with one hand. You actually need, or sorry, with one finger. You need 2 motions. So it's 2 fingers have to grab, pull down, and pull out. So to actually release this takes that multiple steps, right? Again, same thing like the carabiners that are triple action, same sort of thing, right? 1, 2, 3. Same stuff here.
Are the triple action gates something that are quite thick? Is that so they can take the load?
So I think it's just because of all the pieces in there and the springs to rotate and spin around. Sure, all of them. The actual like loading on it, you can compare them.
Just in comparison to like climbing triple actions, have thinner triple action.
Yeah, it could be specific to the ANSI standard that has some requirements for it. That'll give you some information. Yeah, and if we check the stats on this one, well, that one just says 30 kilonewtons. Say, oh yeah, 16 kilonewtons on the gate. So yeah, it is much stronger. This one's only 9 kilonewtons. So yeah, there's a difference. Seat. Is anyone bored? Okay. Okay. A lot of shows. I didn't know if we were actually going to go through it here. Seat. Right. You're welcome to try this one on as well. So this is another harness. Same sort of idea. This one's actually easy. Someone want to put one on real quick? Sure.
Well, it's like a big thing and they put it on in front of their chest, but
And
Sit there and relax.
so this one's kind of nice. You just put it on like a jacket. So it's called a vest style harness. And the rest you can figure out pretty easily, actually. No training. Look at this, ladies and gentlemen, first time. And then this is the seat. So
It's like, oh, what should I do with this?
the seat has this metal piece along the bottom, so it's literally like a nice comfy seat. And this will clip into the harness right here, so that you can put your positioning through these two D-rings and then just sit in that. So a really nice, handy feature. It is extra weight though, so when Davide's borrowed this harness, it's always the debate of, do I want to bring the seat? What are we doing? Do I bring it up or not? Yeah, you got the right idea. Yep. Perfect.
And you tie this.
See, they're professional already.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and then they have locking, spinny things here as well to lock and unlock it. Right. So if that's locked, you can't adjust it. Right. So you have to unlock it, and then we'll let you change to like all sorts of. The other fun one, if you rotate to one side. So this right here is a little zipper pouch that has an extra strap in it. And this strap is if you're hanging in this, there's a thing called compartment syndrome, where if you're effectively, it's like a tourniquet around your legs when you're hanging in this harness. The blood flow isn't going in and out of your legs. So if you now get released from that harness, so if you get lowered all the way to the ground and they unweight your harness, people can actually die once they're on the ground. They safely made it to the ground, they unweight the harness, and then they get a potassium shock to their heart or some other chemical that got built up in that leg that was hanging there. So these are straps that you can deploy if you're hanging, hence them being there every time, and you can loop them around your foot and now stand up and literally do little exercises while you're waiting to get rescued.
Oh, because you need to make
Keep
the blood flow. It's not stuck.
Now, if they're unconscious, you leave them hanging when you get them to the bottom until the ambulance is there, and they can immediately give IVs and deal with it. If they're unconscious, if they're conscious themselves, then unweighting and moving around. And I've found this too, just hanging in a harness. If I'm doing suspended work, you have to kind of make sure that you're, keeping things moving. You feel like it's a little tingly. You're like, oh, okay, gotta get some blood to that one's good, right? Just make sure you don't end up with that sort of. Yeah, you don't. Okay, seat rigging, hoisting. Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, there's a lot of gear, right? The more gear you have, the more you can do. But like for actual, like attaching to antennas, we've got a bunch of straps and pulleys for putting ropes up through the tower and having the ground crew do most of the work. That's a huge part of it on the tower. The less, anything that I don't have to do, I don't do. And that's how you can manage 8 hours on the tower and not be completely fatigued. Because the ground crew can take a nap for an hour and they can swap off. And if you have enough helpers, you can make them do all the work. So again, recent example, we went up to the radio site and we were raising up a 90-pound antenna. That was heavy. That one was something like that. We rigged up a skate block 2-to-1 with a 5-to-1 pulley like reduction system at the bottom. Pretty complicated rigging setup. I helped get it rigged up at the bottom. Davide already climbed up the tower to receive the antenna. And then I just chilled and hung out and let them do all the work. And then I climbed up and met with Davide, and then we received the antenna at the top and then installed it because it took a while to lift this thing up to 200 feet.
Yeah, sorry we lifted it too slow.
No, it was great. I didn't have to do anything, right? And case in point, pulleys, mechanical advantage, all that sort of stuff really, really helps. Helps you do a lot of things. And warm gloves. And you can pass that on to us if you want to look at it, or try it on if you want to try it on.
Have you shown a progress chapter?
No, it's in that box. I'll have one of the progress capture pulleys. But when you have friends that have them, like Davide was on the call, he has some progress capture pulleys, and he brings those to events, and then that allows you to have a pulley going over the top that has a little progress capture on it, so that the crew that's pulling can let go without it falling down. Kind of useful. Buckets. I didn't bring my buckets, but I have kind of these bags. Same sort of idea. Rope bag is really handy. You can just push it in, and it comes right back out. It's magical. You don't ever have to like coil it up, but you always inspect the rope every time you use it as well. So I always inspect it before I put it back in the bag. Cable grabs. Yeah. Okay, good. So this one's expensive and heavy. A lot of, just not a lot. I don't know. Half of the towers I climb these days have a actual ladder on them. And that ladder has a cable if you're lucky. And if you're really lucky, the cable's in good shape. It's been inspected recently, and it has all the markings on it for you to safely use that. Technically, the first person up should be climbing normally, like with just clipped in with their own primary and secondary, and then once they're at the top and they can inspect the anchor at the top, because you can't inspect that until you're up there, then the remaining climbers could then use the cable system if they've done that inspection, right? This is kind of crazy. This yellow block is also shock absorption, believe it or not. So if you look at it really closely, it's got all these funky S-shaped like things in it. So if this gets fallen on, it's got a swivel in it as well so that it doesn't torque it. And then that will actually pop and like stretch out a little bit just to reduce the forces again. And then to actually release this, it's like turns down, up, and then like a whole mess of things you have to pull back. And then you pull it out, and then the cable can drop in, and then it will clip in place. And then it just goes up and down, and very much like that one actually, the work that you have there. This one will slide up and down, and then it'll catch. So anytime this foot comes down, it'll catch and stop your fall as well. This one you flip directly to your sternal. You're climbing up the ladder, right? And when you're using this is your secondary. Your hands are still your primary climbing up the ladder to go up that way. If I want to take a break, I put a different primary on, so I put my positioning in place, and then this one just hangs there a secondary. That's heavy, like $500. Yeah, stuff adds up. Don't worry. Okay, pricing. Yeah, there are your questions. Okay, so from GME Supply, so that basic set only $500. I was actually impressed. So harness, helmet, all rest, and positioning.
But they are not really good quality, same as yours.
So that'll let you do it and do some basic stuff. And I have friends that have climbed with me with that level of gear, and it's fine. And they very quickly upgrade to nicer stuff if you're doing it more regularly. If you go for the fancy kit from GME Supply, $2,300 for kind of a good basic setup with about, I don't know, half of this gear. And then there's some specialized equipment in there that you get that's purpose, like the cable grab that's specialized, that was actually given to me by someone who I helped on a project. They bought it new and gave it to me as one that I can now use for my climbing, which is great. You notice all my stuff has orange nail polish on it, so I know which gear is mine. If I'm climbing with other climbers, yeah, you have one climb where you forget whose gear is what, and then it never happens again because you label everything. The training courses, so I briefly alluded to that. Those cost money too, of course. So that's $1,000 for a 1-day class, I think, and then like $1,400 or something for a 2-day. Mine was a 3-day, it was like $1,700. So those all add up as well. Because as part of your requirement to be able to climb, so you need that certification card or for the tower site or to depends on which additional training you're getting. So some like this course actually prerequisites is 90 days on tower work days or more documented and attested by your employer before you can even take this class. So there's one class before this, which is like intro to tower climbing, a 1-day, 8-hour class where you just do the basics. And then depending on what level of training, so like competent climber, you can get done in a shorter class. If you need rescue training as well, or if you need rigging training, competent climber refresher only, then the advanced rescue, which you already have taken basic rescue and you had those skill sets, any rigging, everything else. Oh, in the year? Oh, food's here. Food's here. Dude, I'm between you.
Everybody's like, well,
okay. So rescue, we touched on this a little bit. 3 types of rescue. Self-rescue is always preferred. So if something happened to me, like we talked, like if you fell and cracked it, if you can get yourself off the tower, that's always preferred, right? There's not another person involved. It's just you. You're safely getting yourself off the tower. If you hurt yourself, if one arm got broken and it's kind of hanging there, one leg got broken and hanging there, if you can find a way to hop down the tower, great, right? You can get yourself to the ground. In parallel, my lovely ground crew would have already arranged for the ambulance, coordinating with them on how to get up to that site, because sometimes these sites are behind a couple locked gates. Maybe someone needs to drive down and escort the ambulance up so they know how to get through the random dirt roads to get to that site. All part of the plan, right? Next best is assisted rescue. That's kind of what's shown here. This is your victim. Oh, well, then it's really washed out. There's a tower here that you can't see. This guy is hanging in the tower. Yay for high contrast ratio. There's a gray power line tower here. Nice drawing from pencil. And this is an assisted rescue. So they're using actually the same skate block that we used up at the other tower, Michael and Ryan. They're using that to lower someone down, which is kind of neat, right? So same method, you loop over, it's a 2-to-1 pulley system. This person can lower using one of these descent devices. And then this person is getting on a pulley trolley or rope on, then you can help kind of guide them, get them navigated around a couple things. So guideline is what I call it. Tag line. That'd be an assisted rescue. The key thing about assisted rescue, neither of the other rescuers is also suspended. They're in a safe position. They're fully locked in. They're good. The worst from a safety perspective is what's known as suspended rescue. So that's where I am clipped to the same thing that my patient is clipped to. So, and that's what we practice because that's actually the hardest one. It's also an unfortunately common one because if someone's unconscious, you might be able to do assisted rescue depending on the tower. It requires a lot more gear and more trained people for it. Suspended rescue, one other person can do with minimal additional gear. So this one red bag is my suspended rescue kit. And it's heavy. If you need to climb up the tower with this, it's not a heavy bag. There we go, lump, lump. And this is just for rescue, so you never use it for anything else. And inside here, rigged right at the top, if I were running up this tower to go save my fellow climber, I literally just grab this one piece, clip it to my harness, and go. Everything that's attached to it allows me to do that rescue at the top.
Oh, it has everything.
It has everything pre-rigged, and it's hard rigged. Like these are actually torqued down. I can't unrig this easily, and that's a big important thing. When you're in rescue brain, your brain is, you're completely adrenaline up to the wazoo, so you're like a junkie going up this tower, right? And now you are trying to make sure you remember, okay, how do I do this rescue? How do I do the same thing? Right, so again, here's an anchor strap. This one doesn't have all the abrasion resistance because you're only using it for rescue. Make sure it's not going over sharp edge. So we're hooking this over our thing. I don't know if I can do that. So that's hooked in. This one's going down to my patient, and this is actually a 4-to-1 pulley system that I can use to unweight their harness or unweight their my saddle harness, and then we're both getting lowered down. So this is again a descent device, very similar to the other ones, just a different brand. That allows us to then go, that will also click down, right? Go down the hill, down the side of the mountain, the side of the tower with them.
Have you done this?
I practiced with it, yes.
Practice, but have you like taken?
Hopefully never have to.
Yeah, like
So, yeah, but training with that is risk with this. It's hard. And we did this training specifically at the end of the day. We did a practice rescue, and I could not lift up Davide with this system. I had to pull out my other mechanical advantage system because my arms were too tired at the end of a 6-hour day on a tower. I wasn't able to do that rescue. That was a really good, important thing to know about too, is you got to be able to do this when push comes to shove. Now, maybe if I was fully adrenaline up, maybe I'd be able to. Right? You get some magic powers when that happens. And this kit always comes with me. Everyone knows where it is. It stays at the bottom of the tower. Everyone recognizes it. It's got the backpack straps on it. It's kind of handy. So if you actually need to bring the full thing up the tower, you could, but that's a lot of weight to schlep up the tower. But yeah, you're welcome to look at this. Don't go mucking around with it, please. But we always check that again as well. Rescue equipment. That's another $1,500.
Is that on the phone or is that
easy.
anchored in on the ground?
Yeah, so this one would be anchored into like a neighboring tower or the hitch of a car or something that's high enough strength. You're only holding out plus half the weight of this system because of that pulley. That pulley has the full weight. This is half the weight here because the other half is right there.
So quick question.
Yeah.
So for example, you were up the like whole thing, and your colleagues that like not feel good, and you need to bring it down.
Mm-hmm.
So how you set that up? So you can do it. Are you doing it with other gears, or
yeah? So
that way?
If I was already on the tower and I was the one doing the rescue, I'd have this sent up to me. And typically we have a haul line, so a non-life rope, often climbing ropes actually that we just use for just haul lines. We have like a bucket on it to bring up and down tools, and bring a gallon of water with me. I'll bring one bottle and then just have the ground crew again do all the work for me. They're going to bring up my fresh one and take down the empty one. So you can do that sort of swap out.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, pictures. Finally, pictures. Sorry, no, I went through the whole thing. So this was my rescue training. So again, practice what you preach. So this one is doing an assisted rescue. suspended rescue with who was the rest? I think that was the instructor. He was actually rescuing me in this one, I think. And then we were practicing for it on, and then each of us had a safety, right? So we had one of the shock absorbers, right? And that's really important, right? In an actual rescue situation, ideally you would have that as well, but are you actually going to have 3 ropes rigged up in this time of the essence there? That's a trade-off that you make between that extra layer of safety versus putting 2 lives on 1 rope. Trade-off. That was kind of cool. This was using a capstan. So this is like a little trailer. Strain plus traction. They're all a little bit different too, right? This descent device is not the same descent device that I'm using day to day when I'm climbing. So that when you can spin around, kind of cool. But if you push past that point, you can just re-engage it, right? That's again the lockout for a tank. All right. We got to be out of here in 10 minutes. Yes, sir.
It's typically something you have to go and check.
Great question. So what do you normally have to check for maintenance on these towers? What are the last couple things I've done? We've had weird noise on a system. We've had high standing wave ratio on a repeater where suddenly the output power dropped down to like 5 watts out of the antenna and 95 watts were reflected back into the transmitter. Not good. I could give like a whole other talk with all these pictures I've taken of all the broken things I found on towers. One of the hardest ones to debug was actually, it started as we have high reflected power from the antenna and people are hearing like a rattling, scratchy noise where like the repeater's kind of coming in and out, coming in and out. So we climbed up the tower and I literally just shook the antenna and there's just a whole bunch of new stuff inside. And like, oh, you guys need a new antenna? Like they brought one because they thought that might have been an issue. It's been up there for 30 years. So we swapped out the antenna. Rattling went away, still had high reflective power. Okay, now we start debugging it. So we actually took TDR time domain reflectometry measurements from the top of the tower, down the cable, and from the bottom in the vault up the cable, and we're able to triangulate a bad spot in the coax and had to start finding it. Went all the way down the tower, inspecting the entire length of the coax, entire length. I actually had to, again, suspend myself with 2 ropes and like get pulled out away from the tower because it was going out this messenger line that I couldn't access and we didn't have a bucket truck to get there. And sure enough, about 15 feet off the side of the tower, hanging out there, there was like, we think it's from falling ice that had literally sheared the side of the coax and damaged the shell, the ground on the outside. The center conductor was still fine, but water had gotten in and copper had corroded like crazy and there were all these metal particles and it just changed the impedance of the cable at that point. So you have this massive impedance discontinuity there. So that whole cable had to get replaced. If you couldn't cut it out and return it, it's easier just to replace it. So that's something like those are the fun ones, and like it's actually kind of nice having the electrical engineering background. I did RF and communications for my master's and undergrad. I'm able to use those tools and that knowledge that I learned in 335 and 402 and microwaves, and actually using that on a tower, like literally bringing a VNA up on a tower with me. It's kind of wild, but it's super fun, right? And I actually get to practice that stuff and actually use it hands-on, which is really kind of great. Tricky ones, we're dealing at the tower we dealt with. We're dealing with a weird, maybe intermodulation, maybe some sort of interference thing that we haven't quite figured out yet, where there's a big noise floor that pops up sometimes. Those are really hard to debug. So we've had to get water out of coax that was not sealed properly by a professional group, and we resealed it and fixed it. Turned out the antenna was actually bad. Their seal job might have been good. We don't know, but we swapped out the antenna. And now we're having different problems. So, and each of these visits is a full day of practicing and planning.
What about visibility conditions? Daytime, nighttime, fog. Would there be times where emergency tower climbing would be needed in the night?
Absolutely. Yeah, so, and if you're working professional fixing, if it's a public service system or police or fire, and it's necessary for the public health and public safety, then yeah, you're getting called out. There are tower climbers in Antarctica, and that's the job.
Hope they pay them well.
Yeah,
Up
in Alaska, you've got people servicing wind turbines and antenna tower systems in icy, sleety rain all times of day or night. If it's providing the power for a village and it goes out in the middle of an ice storm, someone's climbing up that tower and trying to de-ice a wind turbine at night. What? So yeah. Luckily, as a volunteer, most of the systems I'm working on are volunteer systems. They're amateur radio emergency communication systems, where we do want to do, like, we want them up and running, but we're not necessarily, like, it's not life or death, at least when we're working on them. But we try to keep them up and running so they can be used in emergencies, but they're not being actively used for like 911 calls daily. So some of the folks, local ham radio operators, they work for the county communications office here in San Luis Obispo, down by the sheriff's office across from the men's colony down the road. And they are all tower trained and they have people on call. So when a site goes down in Rio Grande, in Paso, wherever, they're driving out there day or night, depending on what the failure is and if the fallback system has worked or if the coverage is down and it's a critical problem. They're going out 24/7 and doing debug, trying to remotely reset, figure out what the problem is, do that debug. Debugging is like the #1 skill, try to figure out what's wrong. Once you know what's wrong, you can go execute. Put a new cable, you put it down. Don't know what's wrong, you're literally just shooting in the dark. So,
Do you have a huge antenna at your house?
I don't have a huge antenna, I have 3 small antennas. Yeah. Other questions?
If you were to fall, what body position would you go into?
If you fell correctly and you were attached to your dorsal and you didn't have your second, like your positioning, you would end up hanging kind of like this. If you're conscious, you can still kind of like keep your head up. But if you're passed out, the handy thing about that is if you're vomiting or something too, it keeps your airway clear out there, right? Yeah, naturally in that position. But you're kind of just hanging there. Your harness is pulling up here, pulling up there, and it's holding up your shoulder. It's a good thing to practice too, that you know what that feels like and how comfortable it is.
You're like mid fall though. Like, is there a certain like position you take to like reduce maybe that or something?
Yeah, it's kind of like the question earlier. If you're in the process of flying, or like if you're about to do a dangerous move on a tower, or a move where your footing might get a little bit loose or something, you want to think about that, right? So if I don't have positioning in place, if I have positioning in place, your falling is often falling in the nutcracker against the tower, right? Like that's what's happening because you're just hanging there and like your face gets smashed into the tower. If you're clipped up top, it usually you'll kind of get spun around as you fall, depending on how that tension happens. If you're hanging out on an arm of a tower, you might be hanging out in wide open space. That is someone else with rope access training, not just tower climbing training now, to be able to want to do it. Or they have to kind of like reach out and see if they can swing you in and flip you in.
Yeah, let's say you're hanging off an arm. Can you technically pull on your own rope to get access to the tower?
Back to the self-rescue thing as well, right? Is if you're able to unload yourself and get yourself unhooked from the tower, that's really handy, right? Then you can save a lot of work for a lot of people getting yourself off. Now, realistically, can you pull yourself up on extra 20 to 40 pounds of gear on you? Or
Oh, yeah.
It's their distance.
Matthew, you talk about it.
Yeah, I got cool stuff. It'll be good. It'll be good. But yeah, show up. What is it? 9 a.m. is when we plan to start with that.
Here, right?
No, so it is in building 8, room 123.
Where's building A?
Yeah, what's
The ag one across.
Oh, okay.
It's by UPD area. You know where that is?
No idea. Is that like the
Ag
wall?
shops.
It is just across from campus market, just closer to us.
We can show you out in the courtyard while we're talking. Vibing. Yes, and then 3 to 5 is the testing session, and yeah, that's about it.
Does it usually take 2 hours?
No, so 2 hours. Time
A lot.
to go.
Hello.
I doubt it.
Okay.
Yeah, so the one warning is we have
For
like,
technician in general, 35 questions. Yes.
and you need a 74% to pass.
It's not like 100%.
70%, right?
74%.
But it should be easier.
If you've been studying it.
Okay.
The people that actually stay for the ham crams and do all the exercises have pretty much 100% pass rate. On average, we average around 85% during the sessions because that 15% leaves early, goes on a big break, doesn't take it seriously, doesn't actually study and follow the process. It's frustrating. It's a long day. You're reading all the questions and answers because the pool is public. But it's not a 35 question pool. It's 10 times that.
Yeah.
So that's get exposed to all of them, and hopefully when you get your actual exam, you remember kind of what you learned and then you can take it. The one warning I will give, we'll appreciate everyone's patience. We have a lot of people on Saturday. We have like 50 people registered right now, which is why we have 2 hours for the session, because you'll take the exam, you'll be done, you'll be able to hang out outside to get your score and then to sign your paperwork. That's gonna take an hour for us to get through. So I appreciate everyone's patience for that process.
Okay.
But yeah.
So you guys said 6:30. Could we go more than 6:30?
3 to 5.
3 to 5.
5 p.m. and then we have to test to get off the date.
Okay.
We'd like to be out of there by.
Oh yeah. That's also why you can't go down until like 7.
We'll be going until 6:30, getting all the paperwork done, submitting it to the volunteer exam coordinator, and then submitting it.
Yes.
Okay.
What about Friday and all day?
Yeah, the test should be.
Building.
Yeah, so.
Like market in front of.
Yeah, if I can. Yes.
If I don't find it, I help you.
I either way. Yeah. Yeah.
That one, oh, this is bad. Pizza for everyone?
No, go for it. You're a club member. I'm going to one event. You're a club
There
member.
we go. What that mean? You're building campus market. Download.
Oh, the one that has a small place and a parking lot in front.
Alright, David, I'm gonna end the meeting here.
Yeah.
Good.
Bye, David.
Good
We'll see you.
hearing from you.
It's like.
Roger, will cool.
Or-
See you, David.
That was pretty